Hello there and welcome to this course on PandaSQL. My name is Valentine. I'll be your instructor. In this course, we'll be doing data analysis work with regards to this tool that's called PandaSQL. So let's get started. By the end of today, we will be expected to have achieved these following learning outcomes. We should be able to recall the basic syntax and structure of SQL queries. We should be able to also use the SQL syntax within Pandas with this tool itself, PandaSQL, to filter, select, and aggregate data. We should also be able to discuss matters efficiency when using PandaSQL for various data sizes and complexity levels, and be able also to compare and contrast advantages and disadvantages using PandaSQL for data manipulation. So let's get started. What is PandaSQL? So PandaSQL is a Python library that we can use to perform data analysis work, and how we would use it is through the use of what are called SQL queries. If you come maybe from a database background, you might be well aware that when it comes to interacting with databases such as relational databases like MySQL, Postgres, SQL Server, we would normally use a language called SQL. And that language would allow us to pull data, insert data, update data, and delete data within those relational database management systems. If we have knowledge of SQL, we then can be able to use what is called PandaSQL together with Python to write data reports. So this session will generally focus on how you can be able to perform various data analysis techniques using PandaSQL. But again, know that a majority of the work that you're going to be using doing using this tool, PandaSQL, will be more like 80% of SQL and 20% or less of Python. So we are not really going to be focusing so much on how do you filter, how do you create summary tables on the side of Pandas. Our focus is assuming that you are quite knowledgeable in SQL. How do you use this tool to be able to write reports? So that's what PandaSQL does. It just helps you to be able to use your SQL knowledge to create reports and query for data, and also use the data that you've queried for different purposes. So generally, for users who are comfortable with SQL, the tool itself, PandaSQL, will provide just a similar or familiar interface between for data manipulation as well as exploration tasks. Why generally would we want to use this? Again, if you have a solid knowledge of SQL and you don't want to spend a lot of time learning about Python or Pandas, then you can always quickly get started with PandaSQL and be able to leverage Python as well as SQL for your analysis. This is in cases where you just want to create just quick reports, data manipulation reports or analysis reports, or even just perform just various tasks in relation to both of those aspects. In some situations, you might also be intending to, maybe you might not have an idea of how to interact with SQL databases and you want to learn how to work with SQL. Then in such situations, using a tool like PandaSQL helps you to be able to interact with the databases that you would want to interact with. So let's get started in this session. So one more thing, by the way, just to cover a bit of some limitations, it's important to also know probably when not to use this tool, so that you don't use it every now and then. So some limitations include that when it comes to working with PandaSQL, you might incur additional overhead costs if you have large amounts of data, because this library is not optimized for handling large amounts of data. For that, you just have to learn how to work with Python or Apache Spark. These are technologies that have support for working with a lot of data. In some situations where you want to perform complex data transformations, maybe you want to perform maybe filtering based on tons of conditions, then just learning how to work with some Python library, maybe like Pandas, or another library like VAX for lots of data might be the best option for that. This is because sometimes you might have long SQL queries which in essence may just not be necessarily maintainable, easily maintainable. In some situations, you might also, as a limitation, have teams that are not familiar with the SQL syntax. Then that means you have to take that into account, something like additional or adaptation learning time. So that is something also to consider. All right, so let's get started with now working with the tool itself. At this particular point, visit the description section of this video, click on the practice resource link, and it should take you to a page that looks like what you're seeing on your screen. Then click on the sample practice resource. That should take you to a notebook that, again, you see on your screen, that we are going to be using for learning how to perform various data analysis techniques using PandaSQL. And also feel free to pause the video if you feel like I'm too fast, and also rewind just in case you also feel like I'm too fast. All right, once you get here, the next thing that you need to do is to save a copy. So go to File, then save a copy of this notebook. It should open a new copy in a new tab. That way you do not have to start from scratch if you ever want to refer to this notebook in the future and you would want to check on some of the code that you had written in the past. Okay, once you have saved a copy, you can close the original one, and then we can go to the one that you have. I'm going to be using the practice notebook, which is just a similar notebook to the sample notebook. Only the practice notebook has more challenges, and we also provide you with the solution notebook. Again, if you're an Afterwork member, you get access to these resources, and you can get to just have the much practice that you need in your learning journey. And you'll also get access to our entire Afterwork library. Yeah, so that's also something to consider. But yeah, I'll be using this for a learning journey. Okay, so once you get here, for me, I'm going to open mine in playground mode. I won't save a copy. I don't want to save a copy. So yeah, don't mind about opening in playground mode. Just skip that. All right, once you get to your copy, now let's run the code for that's under prerequisites. The first thing that we'll need to do is to install PandaSQL. So let's install it by running this cell. That's and in that cell we have this code pip install PandaSQL, and it should take a few seconds to complete that installation. So let's do that. Taking a few seconds. Okay, initially it does take maybe 10 seconds, so sometimes it can take faster, but now it has finished, so we should be good to go. So it has finished connecting, and then it has also done so for installation of our library. So is it done? Not yet. Still doing the same thing. Okay, all right, installed. So to now, the next thing that we need to do, we need to install the required libraries, the libraries that we'll use for data manipulation. I mentioned that we are going to be using like 80% on the SQL side, so we'll be using PandaSQL for that. But on the Python side, we're going to be working with the Pandas library, but we won't do a lot of analysis work with that. All right, run that, and then once you're done, we should be good to go to learn the first concept. So the basic concept when it comes to data analysis is to perform filtering. Sometimes you might want to filter for data that helps with your research question. Maybe the entire data set doesn't really help you answer the research question. So assuming that we had this sales data set that we see here, which you can run, and it contains information about orders made by customers. Once you run this just imports the data that we have using the Pandas library. Then, in order now to perform further operations, now here we're just previewing our data. If you wanted to now use PandaSQL to now query for data and be more specific to the data that we want, use conditions, then we can use the PandaSQL as shown. So first of all, we define our query, which is just generally a string. And when it comes to using SQL, we would use this following query. So select keyword all the columns from sales data. This is the table, which is actually what you see here, which is the data frame name. So sales data, select all records from all columns from sales data where category column. So when you look over here, we have category column is equals to electronics. That's the query that we have here, and we enclose it in 3 delimiter characters. So these are just quotes. The first sets of quotes, we actually enclose them in two sets of, well, it's one set of quotes, but you have three quotes at the beginning and three quotes at the very end. So we enclose that and we store that query in the query variable. And then after that, we can be able to execute that query, the SQL query that we want against our table, by simply using the PSQL variable, which is what we actually referencing the PandaSQL variable library, and we are using the SQLDF function to execute the query. So we pass our query to that function as well as set locals for that. Just to mention that we are intending to run the commands just locally within this application, and this might be useful in cases, especially when you have functions where you can define that that execution to happen just within your function. All right, so once we have run this, we can just display the filter data, which will also appear technically. It will appear like a data frame. So what we have here is the data frame that contains records with category as electronics. All right, pause the video and then work on the challenge. So you might have noticed that in this case, we filtered and we displayed everything that we see here. You can still be able to use pandas to be able to do further manipulation. But if you wanted to limit the number of records that you get, like the first 5, you can still use SQL for that. So with SQL, we would normally use the limit keyword. So again, if we had this new data set that we have here, and which the head function gives us the first 5 records, but if we wanted to limit to a certain number, we can use, let's say, select star. By the way, you don't have to use 3. If it's on the same line, you can just use 2 quotes, just 1 quotes, just 1 like that. It's not necessarily use 3. If it's on 1 line, you just use 1 quote, but if it's on 2 lines, then you can use, it's across multiple lines, then you can use 3 quotes, but I'll just leave it as that. So this is our query. We select all columns from sales data and we limit, so we specify the number of records that we want to preview, the records to just 5 of them, and yeah, so the rest is just printing out the limited results, which we are able to see here. By the way, this is a pandas data frame. We can do other pandas data manipulation if you want, tasks if you want. Right, pause the video and then work on the challenge. In some situations, we might want to sort data by, maybe this data that we have displayed, we might want to sort it maybe by this column or even category column or total price column. So in SQL, we would normally use the order by keyword, just as we did here for limit. We can still use order by. So if this is our data set and we wanted to, again, query it, so this is our query. So select all columns from sales data. Then we say order by, this is the keyword for that. Then order by order date. So this is the order date, but now in descending order. So we have greater values, then lower values coming last. So yeah, let's run that. So you can be able to see that we've ordered by this. So we have November here, but here we have May. Pause the video and then work on the challenge. All right, moving on. In some situations, we might want to create summary tables. So these are pivot tables that we'd create from bigger tables. So assuming that we had this data set, when it comes to writing our query in SQL, we would use group by. So in pandas, we also have a group by function. In SQL, we also have a group by keyword that allows us to be able to group by whatever column that we want. And also something else that you'll note, here we are getting all the columns. How do we limit all the columns? Actually, how do we specify we want all the columns? We specify by using this star that you see here. You see that star? That's what we use to be able to get all the columns. But if we wanted to specify this, maybe 2 column names, we could have just written ordered ID and column name instead of just the star. So we would have enclosed these ones in actually delimiter characters. Yes, delimiter characters. Actually, that's what we're doing in this other example for grouping by data. So we want to display this column and we also want to get a sum of the total price per category. And that column will have total sales as the column name. So we'll have two column names, the product category column name, we have delimiter. And by the way, I mentioned these starting quotes, the three ones are called delimiter, but they're just quotes, comments for quotes. They're just normal quotes, not delimiters. These ones are the delimiter ones. Yeah. So these ones, the delimiter characters, we enclose them in just we enclose them around the column names that we have. The reason why is because we have more than a word in a column name, so we do that. And here we also specify the total price. We want the sum of total for each category for total price, and also we want this particular column total price to have total sales. So in our pivot table, we will have product category and total sales. And we just specify here that we want to group by product category, which is what we have here. And that's generally it. We should be able to get a pivot table that gives us that. And we can use this for data analysis if we want. Pause the video and then work on the challenge. All right, moving on. We have also seen here in our case here, we used an aggregate function. So we can also use other aggregate functions, not just the sum. We can use average, we can use max, min, etc. So assuming again, I will just repeat the same concept. We had this data set and we wanted to create a pivot table out of this particular table, and we wanted to work maybe with region, have a summary table with region as well as total price. Then so region, total price, but now the total price will be the sum of total price for each region. Then we can just use the sum as, you know, the sum aggregate function as shown here. So we pass the total price column to the sum function, and that column will be called total sales, and we have region, and we group by region. And that's it. That's what you have. Pause the video and then work on the challenge. Moving on, we can decide to also filter for data by filter for grouping the grouped data. So filter a pivot table. We can decide to filter a pivot table by adding a condition, but that condition we would use the having keyword. So assuming again we had this data set, these are just data sets containing just different information. So assuming that we had this data set and we wanted to create a summary table that contains product category, and here we haven't specified the new column name, so we'll have sum then quantity. We grouped by product category, but we want to have only records in that summary table that have quantity greater than 500. So this is how we are able to set that, by saying having quantity 500. You may not necessarily need to have the quotes, the delimiter quotes there, but it's okay. So you can see what we have essentially. The renaming, this again, you could just use the as keyword to be able to do that, as. All right, pause the video and then work on the challenge. All right, lastly, the last concept that we're going to be covering in this session, sometimes you might want to combine queries. So we might want to get data maybe from one particular data set, which is this is the data frame. But again, here we're just going to combine just two queries, the results of two queries. But now we can join those two queries to be able to get an output that we want. So assuming that we have this SQL query, this is the first one. Again, this also introduces a new concept. So instead of using double quotes, we can also use single quotes to enclose our query. So select all columns from data. This is the data frame. Where quantity is greater than 2. And our second query will be select from the data where unit price will be greater than 100. And again, we would want to work with both of those. So if we run this, you should be able to, we actually combine them using union keyword, and then we pass that query, combined query, to the SQL df function, which again, we're able to print out. So if you look at this closely, you can see that we have two particular conditions. We have quantity is greater than 2, as well as unit price is greater than 100. So if it's not greater than 2, then the unit price is greater than 100. And again, you have so much that you can do when it comes to working with Panda SQL, because the reason is because if you're really knowledgeable with SQL, you can write complex queries, and that's the beauty about this. You're you're limited only by your knowledge of SQL in such a situation. But again, you could always just play around with both. If you're not really sure in certain situations, you could always research a bit on how to implement in SQL. But if you're not, you can always take the result that you're comfortable with and then use maybe pandas for just data manipulation. All right, pause the video and then work on the challenge, and then we'll just talk about the next steps. Okay, so I hope you're able to find this resource valuable, this course valuable. It might have been something that would have been just useful. It might give you some useful knowledge that you could use in a certain project, whether it's teaching people how to work with SQL or in just different situations. Something to note is that if you want to continue along with this journey, it's important to continue learning about just data analysis tools that you have at your disposal. There are various tools that we would recommend. Maybe if you're coming from a Python background, we would highly recommend that you look into another tool that works together with pandas that would refer to using AI or LLMs. So that is Pandas AI library. That might be useful because it helps you to integrate LLMs into, or large language models into your analysis. So we also have a course on that. You could always have a look at that on our platform. And again, we would also recommend that you become an Afterwork member. You'll actually get access to resources, tons of resources that might be helpful in your learning journey. Right, so that's it with regards to this learning journey. If you did find this learning journey or this resource that we've provided useful, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. That's the best that we could ask of you. That's the most we could ask of you. And if you'd want to be informed when we post such future learning experiences, intensive, short ones, be sure to subscribe, and see you in the next course. And all the best in your journey. Bye-bye.